Hey everyone, you're listening to the Active Turnkey podcast, a podcast designed for hands-off, passive real estate rental investors. In the Active Turnkey podcast, you'll hear Tom Olson and Jared Stoltmeister discuss all things turnkey rentals with other turnkey providers, service providers, and rental investors. Our goal is to help you reach your financial freedom and whatever comes after that. Let's go. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Active Turnkey podcast. I'm your host, Jared Stoltmeister, and I have Tom Olson with us again. His streak is intact as far as being a guest here on his own podcast.
Well, this is actually the Active Turnkey podcast, Jared. It's not my podcast. It's really about our investors.
Can we cut this? No, I'm just kidding. No, we're good. No, it is exciting, and I'm trying to kiss up to the boss.
I don't think I was here at the last one that we recorded. I think you did one without me.
I didn't.
You didn't do it? You scratched it?
I did.
Were you nervous without me, Jared?
Yeah, I did.
Do I need to push you out of the nest a little bit?
Yes, please.
All right.
And I really enjoy it when we do that in front of the audience. It always helps me. It helps me feel better about myself in general.
Jared, I just need to let you know today, you can do it.
Okay.
You can do it.
That's what I needed.
You are a conduit.
Wow. That's called, that's showmanship. He knows how to do it.
Yes.
And so.
And like normal, we have already gotten off track.
Correct. And so our streak is intact in that case as well. So
exactly.
All right. So we are back after a couple weeks off, but we have a special guest today.
So today we've got Mike Kvachkoff. Jared already kind of introduced him. So how you doing, Mike?
Good, guys. I appreciate you having me be on. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting world in the world of evictions right now. We're learning new things every day. Judges are learning new things every day. Tenants are certainly learning new things every day. We're trying to kind of feel our way the best we can through this process.
It's interesting because whenever you read the headlines, it almost seems like you're not allowed to evict anybody for any purpose, for any reason right now, until January or until whenever further notice. Today I'm just waiting to learn what the real truth is. So just so everybody, all the listeners are listening right now, today's not going to be about our opinion. Although we may give it, sometimes we tend to give our opinion. It's going to be more about like, what are we actually seeing in the law? What are the judges telling the attorneys right now? So I am excited about having Mike. So, so Jared, do you have specific questions to kind of start this with Mike? Sure. Or do you kind of have a way you want to go with this?
Well, actually, before we get going, I would like, Mike, for you to introduce yourself. Just talk a little bit about yourself, what you do here in Northwest Indiana, talk about your services, and just so the people here listening can get to know you a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm an attorney in Crown Point. I've been an attorney since 2013. We've been working hand in hand with a title company that's owned by Doug, who's my father. He owns the title company, so I kind of work hand in hand with them. I'm actually working, kind of running the day-to-day for the title company as my dad moves towards retirement. So we're trying to make that transition happen. That's kind of what I do on the daily. We do a lot of evictions. We do a lot of basically anything real estate related, contract related that we kind of dive into and help where we can. We do work with primarily investors because there's a niche area there, I think, that's unrepresented by real estate attorneys. Most real estate attorneys in the area are very broad. We try to kind of focus on the investor side of it because there's a lot there that kind of goes unnoticed if you're not in that niche. So that's kind of what we do.
Yeah. So in every little area of the country, there's always like the 3 or 4, really, real estate attorneys that most people would say, hey, these are the 3 or 4 guys you go to. And if you have a property, I would say in Northwest Indiana, and if you need a real estate attorney that can do pretty much anything from evictions to title, really, I think it's great to have a real estate attorney that understands title, because I think a lot of either real estate attorneys don't understand title very well, but also understands the tax sale process as well. Mike's an expert in the tax sale process. So I just want to let the audience know, if you do have properties in Northwest Indiana, and Mike is the attorney that I would recommend. There's even a couple local groups in Facebook and stuff where people are always asking for an attorney, and every single time I either mention Doug or Mike from Indiana Title Network. So thank you again for being on, Mike. We're really interested in kind of the legalities around evictions. And maybe there's some more things we can get into. And I'd like to hear it from maybe, what you believe the government's perspective is, how should landlords be thinking, and even the tenants, because at the end of the day, like, the tenant is the customer. We do want to kind of, provide a service to the tenant as well, but we also kind of want to be fair with the whole thing. There should be an equal level of exchange. You pay rent to have the ability to live in a property. So, there should be some kind of fairness there, but how do we think about 2020, and what are you seeing?
So, and unfortunately, my answer, it depends on the county. Going back to when this all started, when the CARES Act was passed by the federal government, we all know you couldn't evict anybody for pretty much any reason, but for maybe some illegality occurring in the property. That, of course, expired in August. And when it expired, there was some wiggle room there where there was no moratorium. Our government is arguing, Democrat versus Republican, they're arguing on what to do with the next relief bill. So in that window, there was a window where you could get some evictions done. It was about 2 or 3 weeks open. And unfortunately, there was a lot of evictions being had. So then that is when President Trump issued his executive order and allowing for a new moratorium, which is what granted the CDC the authority that it's claiming to have to enter a new moratorium. So there's, I guess, a few moratoriums going on at the moment. One, there is a moratorium on any property whose owner has a federally insured mortgage, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, VA. That expires at the end of the year. That's always been the case. That hasn't changed. The CDC has taken a creative route, and I say creative because I don't know that legally they have the authority to do it, but if we're following it, I guess that means they do. So what they're doing is they've come out with this declaration form. Declaration form says that you could be exempt if you are a resident of a single family member home in the United States and you are behind on your rent, and you can prove a variety of things. You could be exempt from the eviction moratorium through the end of the year. The main ones include that you've applied for government assistance. So if you have a tenant who lives in Indiana, that would include the Indiana housing subsidy that came down from Governor Holcomb. I believe it was August 1st that he started it. If you've applied for that, that's a requirement. If you've applied for local housing assistance, I know in Lake County, there's several districts that have their own rental assistance. There's HUD, of course. HUD can provide some assistance. You have to apply for those. The other requirement is you have to earn under $99,000 a year. I don't think we're going to see much of that where that's being violated. You have to be able to show that you've been attempting to make payments, but attempting to make rent payments, that you have lost income due to COVID-19. There's a variety of factors. The problem we're seeing, and in fact, I had a case last week, is not so much with the declaration form, it's with how the courts are handling it.
Sure. Right.
So the CDC's edict is incredibly clear. The burden is on the tenant. The tenant has the burden of filling out this form under the penalties for perjury, subject to imprisonment if they're lying or misleading the court, to state that they meet not some of, but all of these qualifications. So what we're seeing is I will get to an eviction hearing and they will not, the subject tenant would not have filled this form out. And we get to the eviction hearing and we show that they're 3 months, 5 months, 6 months. I had someone who was 9 months behind on the rent. I had one that was 4 years behind on the rent, and the owner finally wanted to remove them. And I kid you not, the judge looks at the tenant and they go, "Have you filled out a CDC declaration form?" And they go, "What's that?" And they go, "Well, here." And they have a form and they hand a form to the tenant in the hearing.
Wow.
And the tenant goes, "Well, can I just sign it right now?" So what the courts have been doing is they've been giving them time. They've been giving them a week, sometimes 2, to review the form, seek legal consultation, see if it applies to them, and then we come back. I kind of call it the Wild West because we're just kind of making things up as we go along here. We're just making up rules that we think are within our power. I guess if the federal government's going to do it, I don't see why the local government can't do it. And we're seeing these situations where we have people who are, in my worst case, 4 years behind on their rent, and the judge looks at them and goes, "Well, if it's for non-payment of rent, I can't evict them until they've had a chance to review this form." So of course, my response is, "Judge, they're 4 years behind. That predates COVID by 4 years.
Yeah.
Judge didn't care. So they're being very, very conservative. That's Lake County. I had a hearing this morning with a different Lake County judge. Because Lake County's in Crown Point has two. So the other judge is being a little more strict. We had a hearing this morning and they said, look, we didn't apply for any government assistance. And she looked right at him because it's via Zoom. She looked right at him and said, I'm sorry, you're not covered. By law, I'm required to evict you. So we're seeing it from both angles, from the same judges in the same building. One being conservative, one following the rules. Well, I shouldn't say the other one's not following the rules. One being conservative with the rules and one taking the rules more literally. We, of course, do evictions in other counties. Like I said, it's county by county. I had a client reach out for a consultation. She had an eviction order in, I think it was Porter County, had an eviction order in Porter County. The tenant who was at the hearing later discovered the CDC declaration form, and later, like a week after the hearing, right before they were about to be evicted, filed it with the court. So the court, on its own, without any motion in front of it, put a hold on the eviction order and reset it for a new hearing. None of which is within the court's discretion. It's not within the CDC's discretion, but it's what we're seeing. Kind of how our office is approaching this, because they are giving them time, these tenants who have not seen this declaration form, is we send it to them. When we file our eviction, we send it with a letter saying this is the federal CDC declaration form, and we're very clear that all the restrictions apply. You know, if you lie or omit, you could be subject to penalties of perjury, which includes imprisonment. Please seek an attorney to see if you're covered. So that's how we're approaching it. I honestly think it's the best, or at least most, we can do, because other than that, I don't know what to do, because I can't have hearings every day on, because we're going to be cycling through these people and they just keep getting reset. So that's the best thing I can think of at this point. Some of it I'm just at a loss for, because there are no actual rules. So like I said, we're just trying to figure it out. And that's kind of how we're approaching it.
So the way I just learned, or the way I'm hearing you, is there are rules. So you said there is no rules just now, but I'm going to kind of make a correction there. I think there is rules. And it sounds like what you told me is that the rules really state that they have, number one, they have to meet all of these qualifications. And the qualifications are they applied for government assistance, which could be HUD, the state, all the other ways to apply for government assistance. They earn under $99,000 a year, and they've attempted to make payments, and they have to prove that they have lost income because of COVID, right? Is there more, or are those the four main things that they have to prove?
Yeah. So, and that's the thing. It's not that they have to prove it. So the CDC order says the filling out of this form by itself prevents an eviction.
Wow.
So that puts now the omen on the landlord to basically do one of two things: let them go or fight it. So there is language in the CDC order says that if you're a landlord and you violate these terms, you're subject to these penalties: $100,000 penalty up to prison time. Basically the same penalties a tenant is subject to if they're caught misleading the court or filling out something that's not true. Practically what we're seeing happen, and what my office is doing, is instead of just filing a straight eviction, we file a motion or a complaint with the court for what's called a declaratory action to make a determination as to whether or not they are covered. So I'm not asking for an eviction unless a court determines that they're not covered. Again, it's kind of how we're trying to cope with the rules without just kind of getting run over by them. So yes, Tom, you're right. There are rules. There are rules in place. It's the interpretation of those rules that we're seeing some gray area on.
So, but it's almost like, two different judges in the exact same district in the exact same courtroom could literally have the exact opposite opinion of what, the interpretation of these rules are.
Yeah.
Does that sound right? Right. Exactly. That's exactly what we're doing.
So it's basically roll the dice. I would like to get into that a little bit, if you don't mind, as far as like the penalties for the landlord that tries to evict somebody that does qualify for these. Like I guess that just doesn't even make sense to me. Like, how would you even know if they qualified or not? And I mean, I think that you've already thought through this enough to say, our stance as an attorney trying to evict some of the people that need to be evicted or that we don't believe qualify for this is, number one, giving them a chance sending them the, the actual paperwork saying, if you fill this out and you qualify, then we're not going to evict you. But like, if not, like we're going to still, move forward with this. But on the flip side, like, can you kind of go into those dangers from an investor standpoint? And, like I don't really understand that to think that I'm going to evict somebody, and it's my fault if they did actually qualify. Can you explain that to me?
So, and I don't have I have the CDC form in front of me. It doesn't really go into necessarily what the penalties are from a landlord's perspective. What I can do, I read what their edict was. It's pretty lengthy, but if you're a landlord, you should read it. If you just Google CDC eviction moratorium, you'll find it. Like I said, it's probably 20 pages long, but if you need to know what you're getting into, because it does lay out some penalties, some hefty penalties for violating them. However, a violation of it would be as if a tenant gives you the declaration form and you ignore it and you file the eviction anyway. That on its face is what the declaration says is a violation by a landlord. So like I said, what we're doing, because of course my job is to act in my client's best interest without subjecting them to these hefty penalties. So we're not actually asking for an eviction. We're asking a judge to determine if they qualify. What I anticipate seeing, well, for instance, like the case I had this morning, I had a tenant who filled out the form, and the form specifically says, I have applied for all government assistance for rent or housing. The keyword being all. I think her efforts were she applied for her local church for some money. That was it. That was the effort. But she filled out this form, signed it under penalty for perjury, and submitted it. Now, she's not in jail right now, and she's not subject to a $100,000 penalty right now, but she technically lied under oath. I think what we're seeing is, I don't want to call it a scare tactic, but I want to call it if it's abused, this is what you could be subject to, because that's practically what I see happening. If you're a landlord and you're getting these forms and you know they probably qualify and you're still trying to kick them out and you're doing it repeatedly, I think that is more the route that the courts will go.
So it's almost as if you're having a pre-hearing before you have a hearing on eviction. You're almost like trying to see if they do qualify, and if they do qualify, then does it just roll right into eviction?
That is what I'm asking for, yeah. So what I do is I make a request for a hearing, and then if the court should determine that, make a declaratory action that they don't qualify, and then give us possession if that's the court's determination.
Now, how are you doing with these letters? I know you're trying to it's more or less evolving for you guys as you guys are moving along. How are these letters that you're sending out? Is that working? Is this a recent thing you guys are trying to do? Just out of curiosity, how's that going?
We just started it this week because my hearing last week got pushed 3 weeks. They said, well, we'll give you 2 weeks to review this federal declaration and then come back. Well, they actually reset it for 3 weeks later. So then that's when we made the decision, look, I think right now we have 40 evictions pending. Sure. Which is just, we can't have those being recycled for the next 6 months. That can't, because we're going to keep getting more. So we can't have that. So what we're doing is sending it to them ahead of time, just because I want to be able to tell a judge in court, Judge, I mailed this to them with the eviction notice. It's like they've had this for now at least 2 weeks. They've had time to review it. They've had time for an attorney to review it. Please don't continue this another week or two so that they have more time to review it, because practically what's going to happen is they're just going to sign it. They're going to sign it anyway. Sure. Because they know that there's no teeth to it. Sure. I mean, the one woman asked if she could sign it that day just to stay in the house. I mean, tenants are not understanding what the purpose of the form is. In my opinion, they are seeing this form as I don't have to get evicted until January form. Sure. So they,
Well, this is why I love working with an attorney like Mike, and I have got lots of other attorneys around the country that I love working with. But Mike, he's never going to say he knows it all, and never going to say he knows exactly what the outcome is going to be. Sure. And no attorney can ever really honestly say that. But as things go along, like you adjust, just like you do in business, just like you do in your own personal life. Like you just have to take this next step and actually adjust, and then it's almost like, well, you got to adjust again. So you adjusted first to actually send the letters to the people. And now he's adjusting again to actually changing how we're even setting up, you're not just setting up an eviction, you're setting up a hearing to see if they do or do not qualify. So I really appreciate your effort on that. Mike, is there anything else that you would recommend that maybe landlords think about right now during 2020 when it comes to any of this stuff, or is there anything else that's you got in your mind?
Especially at this time, if you're not sure on how to proceed, I would at least get a consult from an attorney. I say that with a grain of salt. Maybe if you get an answer that you don't like, maybe get a second opinion, because I am in a thread on evictions through the state of Indiana for attorneys, real estate attorneys. And I saw one attorney's response was, you can't evict for any reason of any kind until January 1st.
Nice.
And so I mean, it's just not true. So you really, if you're unsure, you need someone who understands the rules, and can do those for you. The other thing is, if you really just don't want to take the risk, one thing that I had talked about with some of my clients, Tom, I think you guys were in on that conversation, is if you're afraid to do the eviction because of these grave penalties, one thing that you can do is request a judgment against your tenant. Not possession, but you can sue for breach of a lease the same way you would sue for any kind of broken contract. So you can sue your tenant for unpaid rent for however long they owe you. It does cost an extra filing fee, because later on down the road, when you want to do the eviction route, you have to refile it as an eviction. But it'll at least get a judgment in place, which I'm sure a lot of investors know. Getting the judgment and collecting the judgment are two of the hardest things you can do in this field. Generally, these tenants, when they're gone. But you can at least get a judgment in place while they're in possession of your property, and you can start trying to collect from them. That's kind of the route. We haven't started going that route yet, because we have seen some wiggle room from both the state moratorium and the federal moratorium. So we're kind of holding off on that, just because it does cost more money. But if you're afraid to go the eviction route because of all these rules, then you can still go that route. That doesn't violate any moratorium.
One quick question for you. I think some people out there, and even for us here, are all evictions the same, or are there differences? Are there different reasons, as opposed to just someone who doesn't pay rent, or an end of lease, or different scenarios where things change or things are different when it comes to eviction?
Yeah. So, I mean, you can evict for any material breach. The main one is, of course, non-payment of rent. If your lease ends in the state of Indiana, if it terminates naturally by time, then they're what's called month-to-month tenants, or tenancies at will. And all you have to do to evict them is file a 30-day notice of intent to terminate a lease. So you send them a notice saying, okay, you're a month-to-month tenant. We intend on terminating our lease November 1st. Please move out by that date, or we'll begin eviction proceedings against you. You can, of course, terminate for other things: drugs in the house, illegal activity in the house, those, none of which is covered by the CDC moratorium. Waste. So if they're treating, we had one tenant who had garbage, front yard, backyard, side yard, turn on the rent, but front yard, backyard, it literally looked like a garbage dump. So the landlord kicked him out for that, because there's garbage everywhere. So things like that, you can. Other breaches of the lease, you can. Rent is the tricky one. I am getting a little hesitation on the termination of the lease rights. If you're going to terminate their lease, make sure you're stating it's due to the expiration of the lease, not for non-payment of rent. Because if you put non-payment of rent in your 30-day notice, I think you're going to get a little resistance from the local judges as to what the actual termination was for. Because then that would push you into are they CDC exempt or not? So that's kind of what I've been telling my clients, is when you send that 30-day termination, just say, look, the lease is done. Your possession has been terminated. Please move out. We can always ask for damages later once they do move out. That includes unpaid rent. But I think if you put it in the notice, you're going to get some resistance from some of the judges.
Interesting.
Yeah, some of my my friends around the country have kind of already shifted to only doing month-to-month leases. We have not done that. Is that something that you're seeing and recommending, or like, pros and cons of that as well? Because like technically, if it's month to month, you could send a 30-day letter at any time.
Yeah, I think that you have a lot more flexibility with the month to month. The problem is, so does the tenant.
Sure.
So if you've got a good tenant who just wants to move out, if they don't have a term lease, they can move out in 30 days, and you have to do probably, fix it up for the next person. So there's pluses and minuses to it. I'm nervous just about how long COVID will happen for. Not even COVID, just how long these restrictions are going to keep going for. I know a lot of it's politically motivated, so I think we could see it ending soon. But again, who knows? You never know. They could just kind of keep extending the moratorium until we have a vaccine and it's proven successful. And that, it's unfortunately unknown. When this first started, I thought by September, October, we would be fine. We would have no moratoriums. We would have no, but we're just not seeing it yet. And there's unfortunately no end in sight.
So we did talk about one way that you can evict tenants, and that is, the end of the lease, obviously. So like and again, this is Indiana. This is where we're at. This is how our judges are interpreting it. I'm sure that there's going to be some states and some jurisdictions where the judges probably are just going to take the case of like, you can't evict anybody for any reason. But, so we can't make this as a blanket statement to everybody across the country, but what we are trying to report today on this is what we're seeing right here in Northwest Indiana. But from your perspective, Mike, what are the other ways that you could evict somebody right now? We talked about, really, it seems like there's really only one reason why you couldn't be able to evict somebody right now. And that is really for non-payment. And if it's non-payment and if they don't qualify, or if they do qualify. So non-payment, if they do qualify, which is basically meaning they have to fill out the CDC form. And on the CDC form, it talks about the $99,000 a year. They've attempted to make payments. They've done all this other stuff. But what are the reasons where you're still saying that they can evict? I do know that you can still evict like a commercial tenant, for instance, right? I mean, we're not talking about office buildings or anything like that. All those tenants can still be evicted for really non-payment or anything. But what are the other causes that we're seeing that you still believe that you do have a shot to be able to evict for other reasons?
Right. So and as you said, the CDC edict is specific to single family residences only.
So not even multifamily, not even apartments?
Well, sorry, things that are classified as residential.
Residential, okay. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So multifamilies, yes, that would fall under the purview. But yes, commercial properties are not exempt. They weren't exempt under the CARES Act. They are not exempt under this edict. And they weren't exempt under Indiana governor's moratorium. So, and like Tom said, this is Indiana specific. I know a lot of other states are moving this direction. But then at the same time, I think New York has banned all evictions until January. So it is state by state. So Indiana is moving in the right direction, I think. We had a local agency through Attorney Jeff Jinks file a federal lawsuit against the governor, which of course ended the prior moratorium. We're seeing a federal apartment, I think it's ACA, I'm not sure exactly what their name is, but they filed a federal lawsuit against the Trump administration and the CDC for this current moratorium. So I think we are starting to see landlords fight back. And I agree with them. But as far as the evictions are going, I believe that non-payment of rent is a tricky one. If it's a commercial property, you should have no issues. If they're breaching the lease in some other way, so I guess the key is the more specific your lease is, then probably the easier likelihood you can have to get them out. If their job is to maintain the grass and they're not, and the grass is 9 inches long, maybe that can be considered a form of waste. I don't know. If you're being cited for it, I've got some clients who have some tenants in Gary who are being cited because Gary has to keep coming and cleaning the yards up, cutting the grass. I think that's a valid reason, because now you as the landlord are incurring actual fees versus just not receiving rent. If the house becomes inhabitable, I had one of those. House became uninhabitable, tenant wouldn't allow the landlord in to fix it. That was a reason to evict somebody. It's crazy what's happening right now. It's almost like they don't want to give up possession for any amount of time because they're afraid they'll never get it back.
Sure.
I think what I've recommended is if you have a tenant that is working with you, at the end of the day, we do have to understand there's a global pandemic going on. People are laid off. We haven't seen this kind of unemployment in over 10 years. So I think work with your tenants as long as they're being reasonable. If they're being unreasonable, then you have no choice, because at the end of the day, it's not a charity. It is a business, and they are there as a, for lack of a better word, consumer. So if they are taking advantage, you need to think about what your next steps are. If they're working with you, it's kind of a gut call. If you think they're going to work with you and they think they're going to get current and they're just going through a tough time right now, maybe try to work with them. But yeah, if they're taking advantage, then I would seek the consult of an attorney to make sure you can file an eviction. But then if that's the route you want to go, I don't really see too many restrictions other than if they clearly fall under the CDC declaration.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I really appreciate your time. Mike, I'd love to get you on some more like actual investor, like talks and strategy and kind of what you see. Even I'd love to learn more about the tax sale process as well at some point.
Sure.
From you, I've heard from your dad several times on the tax sale. It's really interesting that you, especially in Indiana, there is still some really great opportunity for tax sales and all that. But so you did tell us about some of the services that you offer, and I 100% agree with Mike. If you guys are out there and you are saying, hey, like, and honestly, if you have a house and somebody hasn't paid for 4 years, honestly, it's not shame on them. It's shame on you. Like, you probably should have made a decision a long time ago to make this happen. And it's, to me, there should be a very firm but graceful process that you guys run with your rentals. And for us, like, if rent is not there on the 1st, we already know, like, it's on our radar. And then if it's not here on the 5th, which to us, it's late on the 2nd, but we can't charge them a penalty or anything until the 5th or the 10th in our state. But then we're sending them a 10-day letter right on the 6th every single month. And then if we don't hear from them or don't receive payment by the 15th or 16th, we are immediately going to our attorney and trying to figure out, what our next steps are. And, to me, like, it might sound bad. It might sound like it's a stiff, hard stance, but I'm telling you, if you're going to own that business, that's what that business requires. And there's no better in Northwest Indiana for this type of thing than Mike Kvachkoff. So, Mike, if somebody wanted to get a hold of you or your title company, could you give us your website, maybe your email address, or if you want to give out your phone number, you can. But I know there's a lot of people that are listening that own properties in Northwest Indiana. Some of the people that are listening, I know, are actually customers of yours that we have referred to you for different things over the years. But if somebody would like to get a hold of you, how would they get a hold of you?
So email or phone is probably best. It's just our last name, Kvachkoff, then the word law, LAW, @gmail.com.
Can you spell that for our audience?
Yeah, it's Kvachkoff is K as in kite, V as in Victor, A as in apple, C as in Charlie, H, K as in kite, O, F as in Frank, F as in Frank, and then the word law, LAW, @gmail.com. Or you call our office. Our office line is 219-661-9500. So it's 219-661-9500. Any questions you have, we'd be happy to answer them. If you just got a quick email's probably best. I get email all day, every day, so I can answer from wherever. But that's probably the best route. But if you're more of a non-person or a phone person, that's fine too.
If somebody were to want to get a hold of you guys for title work, and maybe you're closing on a property or you need an investor-friendly title company, is there a website for that or a phone number for that, Mike?
Yeah, so our website is www.indianatitlenetwork.com, or you can call the office, 219-662-8200.
Awesome. Yeah. I know that, like he said, there's some other things we'd like to have you on, but right now, I don't think there's anything our listeners would be more interested in hearing than what we just discussed. So I really appreciate you coming on, Mike. And I know we've been in communication about our own things. Yeah. It seems like on a daily basis. But I really appreciate your services for us. And on a side note, for Olson Group, just remember we do build rental portfolios for investors. And so if you're interested in purchasing turnkey rental properties, you can reach me at jared@buyolsongroup.com, or you can go to our website at buyolsongroup.com. And remember, we do build rental portfolios for investors. And so thank you for joining us on our Active Turnkey podcast.
The best way to buy rentals.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, guys.
Olson Group Network makes no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast should not be considered professional advice. Unless specifically stated otherwise, Olson Group Network does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement. Any third-party materials or content of any third-party site referenced in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the opinions, standards, or policies of Olson Group Network. Olson Group Network assumes no responsibility or liability for the accuracy or completeness of the content contained in third-party materials or on third-party sites referenced in this podcast or the compliance with the applicable laws of such materials and or links referenced herein.